I have a scripture story to share with you. I'm telling it from heart, not so much from memory. And it's from John chapter 13. On the day that Jesus and his followers gathered to celebrate what would be their last Passover meal together, Jesus decided to show them the full extent of his love. And so he took off his outer garment and he tied a towel around his waist. He filled a basin with water and he began to wash the disciples' feet, and he dried them with that towel. He came to Peter. Peter said, "Are you going to wash my feet?" And Jesus said, "You don't understand what I'm doing right now, but later you will." And Peter said, "No, Lord, you will never wash my feet." And Jesus said, "Unless I wash you, you have no part with me." So Peter said, "Okay then, Lord, don't just wash my feet, wash my hands, wash my head as well." And when Jesus was done washing, he came back to the meal, put on his outer garment, and he spoke to them. He said, "Do you understand what I've done for you? You call me teacher, you call me Lord, and that is good. That is what I am. So if I, your teacher, have washed your feet, you should wash each other's feet. I've given you an example that you should do as I have done. And now that you know these things, you are going to be blessed if you do them." The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. So, how many of you have ticklish feet? How many of you doesn't bother to have your feet touched? Well, there's a few of you too. Yeah, okay. Well, I don't know what the stats were on ticklish feet in Jesus' day, but we do know that foot washing was a general practice of hospitality. A host of a meal would bow and greet and then kiss their guest, and then they would offer water to the guests so that they could wash their feet, or they would have one of the servants in their household wash the feet of their guest. And as we heard in the scripture story that I just told, Jesus is the one that takes on the role of the servant to wash his guests' feet. And then he asks them to do the same for each other. And there are other places in Scripture that Jesus leaves an instruction with his followers for what they're to do. He asks them to share the Last Supper with each other and remember him. And we do this. We do it in communion. And Jesus instructs his followers to baptize people into the Christian faith. And we do this. And we call these actions sacraments. They're visible signs of invisible grace, God's invisible grace. And it was an early church father named Augustine that gave them that description. Visible signs of God's invisible grace. I had a professor at theological college who saw foot washing as a sacrament. He called it the sacrament that never was. After all, like communion and like baptism, he did instruct his followers to wash each other's feet. But foot washing, well, it's not something that we do that often. But it's one thing that did happen on our canoe trip this summer in Algonquin Park. We had a foot washing ritual as part of our focus on water. And I took on the role of washing our campers' feet. And I want to tell you about the invisible grace that I experienced in that foot washing time. It was very personal. I felt honored to be allowed to do it. I was down at their feet, looking up at them. It was a way to bless them. And it was a way to pray God's goodness upon them. It was a wordless way of saying, I honor the holy presence of God that dwells within you. I see the beauty of who you are as a unique child of God. It's hard to describe that sacredness of serving someone so intimately. Foot washing was a sign of God's invisible grace to me. And then the tables turned, and one of our members invited or asked if they could wash my feet. And as she washed my feet, let me tell you of how it was a visible sign of God's invisible grace. I felt cared for. I felt treasured. I felt safe. I felt seen. I felt loved just the way I was. So foot washing on the receiving end was also to me a visible sign of God's invisible grace to me. And it got me thinking that whole time, that whole experience, it got me thinking about the ways that we experience God's invisible grace right here at Collier through our adult ministries. It's Adult Ministry Sunday. So I asked the members of our Adult Ministries Committee to bring symbols in today that represent their program or their group so that we could all see the signs of God's invisible grace that happen through all of the different adult programs that we offer. So at this time, and we haven't practiced this, I'm going to invite them to come forward with their symbols of God's invisible grace. And I'll call out the names of the groups, and if you're the one presenting, just come forward and present it on the communion table. Jesus Walk, Life Groups, Prayer Shawl Ministry, Stories of God, Collier's Reading Circle, Rainbows, Friendship Bible Study, Seniors Fellowship Luncheon, Thursday morning Bible study, small groups, camping retreats, and day retreats, men's study group, Collier's prayer companions. Look at all these signs of God's invisible grace to us here at Collier. It's beautiful. I'm going to talk about each of them. Life groups. That was pretty dramatic. Leona couldn't get the ladder undone. That's the step ladder. Thank you, Will. God's invisible grace comes through life groups when they give a step up in life. The group meets and gives encouragement, and it gives perspective to each other. It allows you to step up or grow in faith. God's invisible grace comes through life groups. And they serve, there's a spot to sit there on the top too. Life groups serve as a place to rest and be cared for by others and by God. A place to let go of your burdens and share them and rest a while in God's love. Jesus walk. It's a pillow with people holding their hands all together, and they're all different. They're all of all different appearances and abilities. God's invisible grace comes to the members of Jesus Walk when everyone has a sense that they belong. It's a circle that holds each other in care. There's a time of sharing at Jesus Walk where each person listens to each other's stories. And like a pillow, it's like a soft landing, a landing of love and respect. God's invisible grace comes through that sense of belonging and that soft landing at Jesus Walk. Friendship Bible study. The stone says, "My friend." And as I explained to you earlier, that invisible grace that comes through Friendship Bible study is that friendship with each other. It's as sure and as certain as a rock. We are sure in Jesus Walk that we have a friend and that someone loves us and listens to us. And that's something to hold on and anchor us. Stories of God, Collier's reading circle. It's little but mighty. It's a bookmark. And a bookmark is what you use when there's a space in between reading a book, right? It's like a pause in between your book. So what the Collier's reading circle does, it gives us a pause. It gives us a moment, a time to reflect and see and look for where God is present in everyday stories and in everyday life. It comes from books, and a visible sign of God's invisible grace. Books to challenge us, and books to help us look at ourselves and look at God and look at others in a new and life-giving way. There's an open Bible over there. That's presented by the Thursday morning Bible study. There's so much that happens in that study. They don't just read the Bible, but they have chosen that as their primary source of where they experience God's grace through reflecting on and sharing about how Scripture touches their real lives. They also sing, they also pray together. Retreats. The gift of nature that we have up at the front. The oak leaves and the hawthorn berries and the bulrushes. If you look closely, there's bulrushes there too. Retreats into Algonquin, day retreats. They give us the gift of creation to allow us to step away, to step back from our everyday lives, from the stressors or from the busyness, and to listen deeply to what God is saying in our lives. So creation is the visible sign of God's invisible grace for our retreats. There's a beautiful prayer shawl. God's invisible grace comes through the prayer shawl ministry, through that tangible hug that is the gift of every prayer shawl that is shared. It's a gift of a sense of God's immediacy in a time of trouble. God's grace comes in the time also that the group shares together on Tuesdays when they meet to create. So God is present also in that community that is built and in the sharing of gifts. There's a lot of grace that comes through that one visible sign, through the prayer shawl ministry. Small groups. You may have heard it. I'll ring it again. The singing bowl is a symbol for small groups. And small groups, well, there's a couple of things that sound is a sign of. It's a sign of listening. We all had to hear it. And so in a small group, there's a trust that is developed in a safe place that is created for all of us to be heard, for all of us to be just exactly where we are on our own individual journeys. And the other part that the small group represents is it's round. And the circle created by people holding each other together is a visible sign of the invisible grace of small groups. Small groups can happen over movies. We have Film, Faith, and Fun. Small groups can happen over a Bible study, as did over the summer. The book of Philippians was studied. Small groups can happen through the group called Ways to Pray, where we practiced different types of prayer. There's all sorts of different small groups that happen. Right now, what's happening is Living the Questions. But that singing bowl is the representative of the small groups. Seniors Fellowship Luncheon. There's a picture here of all sorts of people holding hands. And what the Seniors Fellowship Luncheon has become for people is a family joined together where everyone is welcome at the table. It's a place where some people come who eat alone all the time. You become welcome into the family of the Seniors Fellowship Luncheon, and that is the symbol of God's invisible grace, being part of the family of God. The men's study group has presented a DVD, and that embodies the image of DVD as a source of God's grace, a way to stimulate your mind and your faith as an opportunity for people, and men especially, to grow together and support each other. Prayer companions, that's that funny looking thing with all the wobbly hands. To me, that's a symbol of hands lifted up in supplication to God. We ask you, God, to bless whatever group the prayer companions is praying for. It could be for the children in their programs. It could be for the people who participate in the AA programs here. It's a whole variety of ministries that happen. But the grace that comes to those people who participate in sharing their love through prayer, that is a means of grace, to lift up our hands and care for others in prayer. Rainbows for adults. There's a journal book here called Prism. And the adults have an opportunity before they come to their sessions, to write down what they are experiencing in the loss that they're going through. And then that allows them to form what they might need to share to the group. So the journal is a visible sign of the invisible grace that comes from sharing and knowing that you are not alone when you are going through such loss and dealing with such overwhelming feelings. So those are all the symbols. And I suppose if you were part of another group, say the choir, you could have your own symbol to present. There's all sorts of groups that happen at Collier that don't come under the umbrella of adult ministry, but you might think to yourself, well, I know a symbol that I could use to represent God's invisible grace that is present to me through this ministry, whatever you're a part of. I'm going to sing a song and invite you into singing the chorus. It's in your bulletin. Over my head, I hear music in the air. And as I sing, I'm going to be listing all the different types of ways that we experience grace through our ministries of adults here at Collier. But to begin with, I'll just sing the chorus for you once, and you are invited to join in as you're comfortable. It's a repeat song, so it's not hard. And join in as you're comfortable, and then I'll give you some more instructions when the verse time comes. Okay. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. You've got it. Okay, so I'm going to sing a verse, and then you'll come in with response, I hear music in the air. So I say, when something happens, and you'll say, I hear music in the air, okay? You'll catch on really quickly. So let's go. When people share their love, music in the air. When we know we belong, I hear music in the air. When we are not alone, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. When people care and listen, I hear music in the air. When faith grows deep through Scripture, I hear music in the air. When folks share food and friendship, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. When space is made for praying, I hear music in the air. When grace comes through a prayer shawl, I hear music in the air. When nature fills our spirits, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. Over my head, I hear music in the air. There must be a God somewhere. Thank you, everybody. Thanks to David. Wow, that's beautiful. I'm not sure if that's the first time we've had djembes at Collier, but it sounded really good.